Hi friends. Tonight, I will guide you into a story carved by wind and wave, tucked into the rugged coastlines of 17th century Iceland. It is a tale of quiet lives broken by unthinkable darkness, of love tested by terror, and of memories that cling like mist to the morning fjords. Let your heart slow now, and drift with me into the first chapter of Beneath the Northern Sky, an Icelander's lament. I remember the sea before it betrayed us. It was not always a thing of fear. In my youth, the sea was the gentle hand that fed us, a deep blue cradle for our boats, and a silvery mirror beneath the endless summer twilight. The waves rolled softly against basalt shores, whispering lullabies older than the sagas, older than men. I am Björn Einarsson, a husband, a father, and a fisherman from the Westman Islands, small rocky outcrops scattered like runes off Iceland's southern coast. We lived humbly, wrapped in wool and weather, sheltered by low turf homes and higher hopes. Our lives were slow, wrapped in prayer, stitched with routine. The kind of life that, once broken, is never easily mended. Our cottage was small, warmed by peat fires and the laughter of our children. My wife, Thora, was a woman of quiet strength, whose loom never stopped singing. She wove dreams into wool. Her voice filled the corners of our home like candlelight. Our children, Elida, full of questions, John, always climbing, and Brynja, still soft with baby curls, ran wild through the sheep pastures, their joy unburdened by the world beyond our island. We did not know then how thin that peace truly was. Tales reached us, of course, always tales. Travellers from the mainland spoke of foreign ships and coastal raids, dark sails, fire, families vanished, but those were distant storms. We were an island among islands, isolated and ignored. We thought ourselves safe. It was the summer of 1627. The sun hung in the sky like a guardian, unwilling to sleep. Grass grew thick and green between the lava stones, and the sea shimmered beneath long evenings. We dried fish on the racks. We sang old ballads. The children gathered angelica and chased the wind. Then the birds fell silent. Not all at once, but day by day. Their chatter thinned, and the mornings grew strange without their songs. I noticed, and so did the old women who read weather in the sky and omens in sheep entrails. The wind shifted. It carried with it a smell, foreign, oily, bitter. Then we saw them. Sails, dark and low, broke the line of the sea, one twilight. First one, then more. Too many to be friendly, too strange in shape to be Danish. They crept toward the coast like phantoms, gliding without haste. We watched from the cliffs, unsure whether to wave or to run. But when the first village was taken, the doubt ended. Smoke smeared the southern sky, thick and black, curling like a curse. Riders came through the night, ragged and wide-eyed. Pirates, they cried. Slavers. Men from lands far beyond the known sea. Barbary corsairs, they said, speaking in tongues that twisted like knives. They burned homes. They took people, children, women, the old, all bound in chains. Fear moved through us faster than fire. We bartered no longer. We prayed harder. We sharpened tools that were never meant to be weapons. I buried our silver beneath the hearthstone. Thora packed what little we could carry, and I found my old fishing spear and laid it beside the bed like a sentry. I told myself we were too small, too far. I was wrong. On the third night, they came. The moon was waning, casting a weak pale light across the harbour. That's when the ships returned, silent and spectral, their hulls darker than the sea. They moved without oars, without wind, as if the ocean itself delivered them. Figures disembarked. They were wrapped in cloths of strange colours, their skin darker than ours, their blades curved like crescent moons. Torches lit their faces in flickers. They shouted in a language I had never heard. Raising ropes and nets meant not for fish, but for us. I gathered my family. We fled through the night, following goat paths known only to locals and ghosts. I led them to a cave hidden behind a veil of ivy, a place I had found in my boyhood while playing truant from church. The mouth was low, the stone cool, the shadows deep. Others had come too. Neighbours, friends, dozens of us, breathing quiet and shallow. Outside, we could hear them, boots on earth, screams, the crack of burning wood, chains, the smell of smoke and sea and terror. I clutched Brynja close. Thora whispered, "Hail Marys." John trembled, but stayed silent. Elida, brave girl, kept her arms around two younger children from the next cottage. They moved through the village like wolves through sheep. We stayed hidden. The night passed in fragments. Fear, then silence, then more fear. When dawn came, weak and reluctant, we crawled to the cave mouth. Our homes were ashes. The air was thick with loss. And though we were alive, something inside us had already died. But it was not over. It had only begun. The raiders had not taken everyone. Yet, the morning after the raiders came was too quiet, like a held breath stretched thin across the land. The sea, so often our friend, lay still, deceptively calm. Gulls circled high, but none dared to descend. The air smelled of wet ash and charred wood. Smoke rose in soft spirals from where our homes had once stood. We remained in the cave, limbs stiff from cold and fear, waiting for signs that the nightmare had truly passed. It hadn't. From the narrow mouth of the cave, I scanned what was left of the village. There were bodies, some crumpled where they'd fallen, others dragged and abandoned like sacks of barley. I saw Gudrun, the elderly widow who sold smoked trout, lying face down in the earth. Her shawl, bright blue and hand-woven, was stained dark near the hem. Nearby, her goat, miraculously alive, chewed listlessly on a scorched patch of moss. I turned back inside. Our little cave, though crowded, had been a fragile sanctuary. We were perhaps 30 souls, men, women, children, sheltering in the shadows. Some wept softly, others sat in stunned silence. A few whispered prayers, their rosaries trembling in their fingers. Thora leaned against the stone wall, cradling Brynja, whose tiny face remained hidden beneath a knitted cap. John leaned against my side, silent. Elida sat near the entrance, her face like flint, watching. No one spoke of leaving. No one dared. But hunger does not wait on fear. By midday, I knew I must go. I told Thora in a whisper. She nodded slowly, her hand tightening around my wrist before letting go. "Take care," she said. "Take care for them. With John beside me, we would not be separated." I crept from the cave, moving low, keeping close to the land. Ash fell like thin snow, coating everything in sorrow. We stepped carefully over debris, weaving between what had been lives. Torn, linens, overturned milk pails, shoes without owners. The sight that broke me most was a small doll, hand-stitched, its yarn hair half burned. It lay beside a child's sandal, charred at the edges. The wind shifted. I heard voices, not Icelandic. Harsh, quick, clipped words drifting from the harbour. A few of the corsairs had stayed behind. They laughed, short, sharp bursts, and I glimpsed them tending to the ships. One man dragged something heavy aboard. A crate? A person? I ducked low, pulling John with me. We waited behind a low wall, hearts thudding, until the voices receded. There was nothing left to gather. The smoke had stolen it all, but I had not come for food. I had come for names. By nightfall, we returned to the cave, pockets empty but minds heavy. "They took Cern," I said quietly, "and her sons." A gasp rippled through the group. I nodded, voice hollow. "And Ragnvaldur and Hjörleifur, anyone who didn't flee fast enough." Thora closed her eyes. "And they'll come again." That truth settled over us like new snow, quiet, cold, inescapable. We could not stay. The cave, though hidden, would not protect us forever. Already, the raiders knew the land. They had moved fast and without mercy. It was only a matter of time before they scoured every crag and corner. The next morning, we met in hushed voices to plan. We would move north, deeper into the cliffs, where ancient lava tunnels curled like veins beneath the hills. They were dangerous, unlit and unstable, but they might offer a way to survive unseen. Old Magnus, the shepherd, spoke of a tunnel once used to hide sheep from winter storms. It's tight, he said, but it runs long, ends in a hollow above the fjord. We had no better hope. By evening, we began the journey. Quiet as snowflakes, we slipped from the cave in pairs, children carried, elders supported. The ground was rough. Stones shifted beneath our feet. The tunnels yawned dark before us, smelling of wet rock and old earth. Inside, the world narrowed. The lava tube closed around us like the throat of a sleeping beast. The air was damp and cold. We lit no torches, moving instead by feel and memory. I led the way, one hand gripping a stone wall, the other wrapped around Brynja, who now would not stop trembling. Behind me, I heard the faint scrape of boots, a cough muffled by cloth, the quiet sniffle of a child. Time stretched in that darkness. It could have been hours, days, or years. At last, the tunnel widened. A faint breeze tickled our faces. Stars blinked through a jagged opening above, a cliffside hollow, unreachable from the beach below. We emerged one by one, blinking, pale, and ghostly in the starlight. And there we waited again. It was safer, higher, but not safe. In the distance, we saw firelight still glimmering on the sea. The ships remained. "They're not done," whispered Elida. She was right. The corsairs had come not for food or plunder alone. They had come for lives, to feed their trade in flesh, their slave markets across the sea, and they would return to find what they missed. We huddled together that night, our numbers smaller than the day before, and sleep, what little of it came, was full of dreams that tasted of salt and smoke. In the morning, we would need a new plan. But for now, beneath the stars and stone, we had one another, and sometimes when all else is taken, that must be enough. Morning came slowly, hesitant and grey, as though the sky itself mourned with us. From our narrow perch above the sea, the world looked smaller, distant, unreal, like a painted scene that had long since peeled and faded. The wind was colder here, edged with salt and sorrow, yet for all its harshness, it was the only breath of safety we had left. The hollow was not much more than a jagged scoop in the cliffside, part cave, part crevice, shielded on three sides by old basalt walls. Moss grew in the cracks, seabirds nested overhead. Far below, the ocean smacked rhythmically against the black stone, its cadence steady and cruel. We were 28 now. Some had not survived the passage. Old Ingebjörg had collapsed in the lava tube, too frail to carry her weight. We could not go back. Her daughter stayed with her for hours, whispering prayers as the rest of us moved forward. By morning, she returned alone, silent as the grave. Thora wrapped her arms around her. There were no words. We rationed what little we had, scraps of dried fish, a handful of barley, a water skin passed slowly from hand to hand. It would not last. But for the moment, hunger was secondary to fear. We took turns watching the sea. Through a gap in the rock, one could see the harbour far below, and the ships still anchored like carrion birds waiting for bones. Black sails furled, tight. Men, dark specks from this height, moved along the shore. They did not rush. They searched. Calm, patient. "They know," said Magnus, his voice as dry as the wind. "They know we fled. It was only a matter of time. Yet what struck me most that morning was not fear, but the strange stillness within me. The Björn who had laughed in the fields, who had taught Jon to mend nets and danced with Thora under the midsummer moon. That man was adrift now, far below in the dark waters. In his place stood something quieter, harder, a man who counted his children each dawn, not by smiles but by breath. The children, God's bless them, were quieter now too. No games, no songs. They sat huddled together, eyes wide, fingers clenched around whatever keepsakes they'd managed to carry. Elida, my brave eldest, still wore her mother's shawl around her shoulders like a knight's cloak. She tended to the smaller ones, feeding them, comforting them, scolding gently when needed. I watched her and felt both pride and grief swell in equal measure. That night, under the waxing moon, I climbed higher along the cliffside to scout. The wind whipped against my face, but I moved with purpose, placing each foot with care. From a ledge above our hollow, I had a broader view. The coast stretched out like a wound, the village below blackened and quiet. But the ships remained. Worse, I saw torches moving inland, search parties. The raiders were combing the hills. I returned, heart pounding, and gathered the others. We spoke in whispers, huddled beneath our thin cloaks. "They're looking," I said. "Not just for things, for us." A murmur passed through the group. Faces drawn, mothers held their children tighter. One man began to weep softly, his hands pressed to his eyes. "We must go farther," said Thora, her voice steady. "This place is no longer safe." "But where?" someone asked. "There is a ravine," said Elida suddenly, surprising us all. "North of the waterfall. We found it last spring, me and Jon. A deep cleft, too narrow for goats, too steep for carts. But if we climb carefully..." I looked at her, astonished. She met my gaze calmly. "I remember," said Jon. "It's hard to get to, but hidden." We had little choice. The next morning, we began again. We moved at first light, leaving behind what we could not carry. The children were slung on backs or held close. We formed a line, winding up the rocks like a procession of ghosts. The way was harder than before, steeper, more exposed. Once, a stone slipped beneath my foot and tumbled, down, clattering loudly. We froze, every breath paused. No shouts followed, no torches flared. We moved on. By midday, we reached the ravine. It was just as Elida had said, a narrow chasm between two rising walls of stone, lined with tufts of grass and stubborn mountain heather. Almost invisible from above, it opened into a shallow basin, protected on all sides. There we stopped. The children drank from a trickling stream. The rest of us sat on stone and lichen, breathing deeply, our legs trembling from the climb. It was safer, but it was not salvation. That night, as I lay beside Thora and our children, I stared up at the stars scattered across the sky like cold fire. Somewhere beyond that dome of light lay the homelands of our enemies, lands of sun and sand, of markets, where flesh was currency, lands where our neighbours now travelled in chains. Would we be next, or had we already lost something that could never be reclaimed? Sleep came fitfully, and in the darkest hour of night, I awoke to the sound of a baby crying. It wasn't one of ours. It came from the edge of the ravine, faint but real, and with it, footsteps. The sound of crying pierced the silence like a needle through linen, thin, wavering, fragile, but unmistakably real. I sat up at once, heart thudding, hand already reaching for the worn wooden haft of my fishing spear, still wrapped in leather cord. Beside me, Thora stirred. She heard it too. Our eyes met in the darkness, and her lips moved soundlessly. "Who?" I shook my head. The ravine, moments before so still, now held breath. All around us, the others woke, roused not by shouts, but by something far worse, uncertainty. Sleep faded from their faces like fog lifting from a glacier. One by one, heads lifted, listening. There it was again. Not from within, from outside. A baby's wail, distant but echoing, carried by the narrow stone walls and made cruel by imagination. It rose and fell like the call of a wounded bird, helpless and alone. Then came another sound, the slow, deliberate crunch of feet pressing into heather and loose rock. Not many, just one, perhaps two, but someone was out there, moving. Stay here, I whispered to Thora, kissing her forehead as I stood. Elida was already awake, crouched near the edge of the ravine, her eyes scanning the moonlit slope beyond. She looked at me, and without speaking, we understood. She would come too. I motioned to John to stay with his mother, then crept forward, keeping low. The stone was cold beneath my hands as I climbed the lip of the ravine. From that higher vantage, I peered out into the world beyond. At first, there was nothing. The heather rippled in the breeze. A cloud passed before the moon, casting the hillside into silver shadow. I saw no torches, no steel glinting under starlight. Then, a shape moved. It staggered, not with the sharp grace of a soldier or the determined stride of a searcher, but with the faltering steps of someone carrying a great burden. I hissed low. There, Elida saw it too. A figure, wrapped in what looked like a wool cloak, was climbing with great difficulty up the incline. They cradled something in their arms. A bundle. No. A child. The baby cried again. I rose slowly, revealing myself in the open. "Halt!" I called out in Icelandic, voice low but firm. "Who goes?" The figure paused. "Please," came the reply, weak and shaking. "Please, don't hide from me. I have no strength left." I recognized the voice. It was Asa Thorsteinsdottir, the young widow from the northern edge of our village. She had been missing since the first night of the raid. Many believed her dead, or worse, taken. Yet here she stood, barefoot, clothes torn, cradling her infant daughter to her chest. I rushed forward, catching her as she sagged with exhaustion. Her lips were cracked, her eyes wide with terror and fever, but she held the child tightly, even as her knees buckled. "Are you real?" she whispered, clutching my tunic. "Am I too late?" "Never," I said. With Elida's help, we brought them down into the ravine. The others crowded around, murmuring in disbelief and relief. Thora took the baby gently, rocking her with practiced arms. Someone passed Asa a cup of water, and she drank it in trembling gulps. It took time for her to speak. "They came," she said hoarsely. "They came in the dark. I hid under the floorboards, behind the root cellar. I heard them take my brother. They took everything." She paused to breathe, each word an effort. "When they left, I crawled out. I couldn't find anyone. Just silence and smoke. I walked. I don't know how long. I heard a voice once. Thought it was a raider. Hid again." "Did they see you?" someone asked. "I don't think so," she whispered. "But I heard them, speaking strange words, laughing. They're still looking." Her warning cast a chill over us all. If they were still sweeping the countryside, our hiding place, no matter how remote, was not invincible. But Asa's arrival brought something else too. A reminder. Not everyone had been lost. And if she had survived, others might yet be hiding, waiting, praying for someone to find them. It sparked a flame in us, faint, flickering but real. That night, as Asa rested in Thora's arms and the baby finally slept, I sat watch at the edge of the ravine with Elida. "She's brave," my daughter said softly. "To walk so far alone." I nodded. "Braver than most kings." She was quiet a moment. "Papa, what if they find us?" "Then we'll run again," I said. "We'll keep running, and if we can't run, we'll fight. but we do not give in. She looked at me, eyes shining with tears not yet shed. I'm scared. So am I said honestly. But that doesn't mean we stop. We keep moving. For your mother, for your brother, for Brynja, for Asa and her baby. She leaned against my shoulder, and together we watched the stars slowly turn. And high above, in that sky of northern fire, I prayed again, not for safety, but for time. Time to find others. Time to plan. Time before the footsteps returned, no longer alone, but in numbers. The morning after Asa's return broke with pale sunlight and a quiet resolve that rippled through the ravine like thawed stream water. Though worn thin by hunger and sleeplessness, there was something new in our small band. Purpose. Her return had changed everything. It had reminded us that others might still be out there. Survivors, hiding, waiting, afraid to move. And if we had a path, any path, we had a duty. Asa rested, still weak, wrapped in Elida's woolen shawl. Her baby nestled beside her like a blossom clinging to frostbitten earth. Her eyes, though shadowed by fatigue, burned with clarity when she called me to her side. I can show you where I came from, she whispered. The path I followed. There were signs of others. Not far. I knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. You're too weak to go again, she nodded, lips tight. But I can describe it. The trail runs behind the cliffs. I marked it. Stones stacked in threes, like my father taught me. I walked past 2 homesteads. One was burned. The other, I think someone was hiding inside. I heard movement. That was all I needed. By mid-morning, I had gathered a small group. Magnus, still strong despite his years, Sigrun, who had worked the coastal routes and knew the land better than most, and young Leifur, barely 17 but fleet of foot and sharp-eyed. We carried no more than was needed. Flint, water, and the long knives we once used for cutting, fish. They would have to do. Before leaving, I spoke with Thora, holding her hand tightly. Watch the children, I said. I always do, she replied with a wan smile. But come back, Björn. Don't follow ghosts. Her voice cracked slightly, but she did not cry. We left just after noon, using a sheep path that ran high along the cliffs. From that elevation, the sea was a great shivering plate of blue-grey. The distant pirate ships now mere silhouettes against the watery horizon. The wind tugged at our cloaks, and each gust seemed to whisper warnings from ancient mouths. We found the first stone marker an hour later, 3 smooth rocks stacked at the base of a birch sapling, just as Asa had described. The second stood beneath an outcrop near a half-frozen stream. We were on the right trail. At the third marker, we reached the scorched homestead. It had belonged to the Halldorson family, 6 souls who had kept goats and beeskeps and whose daughter played the lyre at spring feasts. Now, it was a ruin. The turf roof had collapsed inward, scorched timbers jutting like broken ribs. Smoke still clung faintly to the soil. Magnus crouched beside the threshold, scanning the ground. No bodies, he said. No fresh graves either. They either fled or were taken. Inside, we found remnants. Shards of pottery, a child's wool mitten, singed at the tips. Sigrun picked up a small wooden carving, a horse with one leg broken. She said nothing, only tucked it into her pouch and walked on. Further down the path, the trees thickened. Here, the snow hadn't melted entirely, and we walked carefully, avoiding patches that could give us away. Then Leifur held up a hand. There, he said, pointing ahead. Another homestead. This one was not burned. It stood slanted but whole, with smoke trailing from a thin chimney, fresh, warm, and living. We dropped low, hidden among the trees, hearts pounding. After a long silence, we approached slowly, hands open, weapons sheathed. I called out softly. "Hello, is anyone there? We mean no harm." Nothing. Then the door opened a crack, and a pair, of eyes peered out, red-rimmed, wary. "We're from Jaime," I said. "Refugees, survivors. We're looking for others." The door opened wider. A man stepped out, middle-aged, thin, hollow-cheeked. "My wife is sick," he said quietly. "We stayed because she cannot walk." We entered. Inside, it was warm and dim. A small fire crackled in the hearth. The man's wife lay on a cot of sheepskins, pale and sweating, her hands trembling. 2 small children clung to her side. "We heard them," he told us. "The pirates. We hid in the root cellar. They never found us. They had food, barely enough for themselves, but they shared what they could. Dried fish, a little skyer. We accepted gratefully. After resting, we prepared to return." "Come with us," I urged. The man hesitated. "She can't make the climb." "Then, we'll carry her," said Magnus. "But you can't stay here. They will sweep the land again." That night, under a rising moon, we bore the woman on a makeshift stretcher made from a door and old rope. The children walked beside her, sleepy but quiet. We moved in silence, retracing our steps with caution. Near the halfway point, Sigrun raised a hand. Torches. Far below, at the edge of the burned homestead, 3 lights flickered. Raider scouts. We froze behind a boulder, breath shallow. The lights bobbed slowly, methodically, searching, but they did not climb. After what felt like an eternity, they turned and disappeared into the valley. We didn't speak again until we reached the ravine. The others rushed to help, hands extended, eyes wide. The children were embraced, the woman wrapped in fresh blankets, and the man clutched my arm with both hands. "Thank you," he whispered. "I thought we were alone." "You're not," I said. "Not anymore." That night, as the ravine swelled with new voices and the fire crackled with renewed warmth, I looked around and saw what we were becoming. Less a band of survivors, more a village reborn in shadow, but deep in my chest, the fear remained. The scouts had come close, too close, and this time, they had seen smoke. Smoke is a language, not the comforting drift from peat fires or the curling ribbon that floats from a fisherman's pipe. No, this smoke stood high and still in the morning air, thin and grey like a finger pointing from sea to sky. It was too far to smell, too deliberate to mistake. It meant one thing: we were found. From my watchpost above the ravine, I squinted toward the south. The smoke rose from a hill above the ruined hamlet, the place we had passed on our return with Arsa and her children, where the scouts had stood, where someone had seen the embers from our own fire, now long cold but not forgotten. They were coming. I descended the path quickly, boots scraping loose stones. Below, the ravine still slumbered, dew on heather and soft breathing in the shadows of rock. Thora met me with her eyes already searching mine. "They've lit a signal," I said. "It's begun." A meeting was called within moments. We gathered beneath the wide outcrop where moss grew thick, all 32 of us, old and young, wounded and weary, with hands cracked from cold and faces drawn tight from days of hunger and fear. "They know," I said. "We must assume that smoke is their message. They've marked our region. They'll come in force." A silence stretched long after the words fell. One of the mothers clutched her child to her breast. Sigrun crossed her arms, lips pursed. Leifer, the swift-footed boy, sat stone still, eyes wide. "We can't fight them," said Magnus at last, voice grave. "Not as we are." "We could run," offered someone else. Thora spoke softly. "Not far, not fast. Not with the injured, the little ones, the weak." "We could scatter," I said. "Split into smaller groups, take different paths, hide where they can't follow. Divide ourselves." Sigrun shook her head. "That's a risk, too. We won't be able to protect one another. We can't protect them all at once," I replied. "That's the truth." I hated it, every word, but I saw it in their faces too. The quiet nods, the trembling acceptance, the hope that maybe, just maybe, smaller groups would pass unseen, that the wide net cast by slavers would miss those few, souls nimble enough to vanish into cracks in the world. 5 groups, I said, each with a leader, a path, and a meeting place, weeks from now, if we survive. We began planning by the hour. Sigrun volunteered to lead 2 families north, toward the hills where streams cut through crags. She knew the goat trails there, where the rock itself folded into shelter. Magnus would take the elders to the ruins of a chapel carved into the cliffs, a forgotten place even before this horror began. Leifur would guide the youngest and quietest children across the shallows, to a sea cave he would leave at low tide when their footprints would wash away. And Thora and I would remain with those who could not flee. Asa, her newborn, the man with a broken ankle, the girl with fever who could barely lift her head. Elida came to me as the sun began to fall. "Send me with Leifur," she said. "He's good, but he's young. I know how to quiet the little ones. I can keep them safe." I wanted to refuse her. I wanted to scream, "No, not you too." But I saw her resolve. She had her mother's stillness, my stubbornness. She had already chosen. I nodded. "You'll lead them from the shadows," I said. "You'll carry our story." She hugged me fiercely then, arms tight around my ribs, and whispered, "Come back." I whispered the same. At dusk, we broke bread together. What little was left. One final meal, passed hand to hand, no words spoken. Asa's child slept at her chest. An old man muttered psalms. Someone hummed the melody of a lullaby, too soft to sing. Then, like ghosts, they left, one by one. The sound of parting feet, the rustle of heather, a kiss here, a nod there. And then only shadows remained. We worked quickly in the silence. The ravine had to be erased. Bedding burned, tracks swept, ashes scattered. Any sign of life undone, as though we had never existed at all. By midnight, only 5 of us remained. I stood at the high rock, watching for movement. Clouds hung low. Stars blinked like frozen tears. And then I heard it, a crack of stone. Boots, slow and deliberate. Voices foreign. They were near, too near. I crept back down the slope and pressed my palm to Thora's. "They're here," I whispered. She did not cry. Instead, she turned to Asa, lifted the child from her arms, and wrapped her in furs. "Hold her," she said. "Hide her." Then, she turned back to me and handed me a knife. "If they find us," she said, "you must live." I shook my head. "We all will," I said. She smiled, small, sad. "You always lie sweetly." The boots drew closer. We retreated deeper into the shadows of stone, and as the first torchlight flickered against the cliff's edge, I tightened my grip on the fishing spear and prayed to all the old gods of fire and ice, not for victory, but for time. The hours just before they came were the strangest of all. There was no roar, no horns, no thunder of men descending. Only stillness, the kind of quiet that settles over the land when snow is about to fall. Soft, watchful, listening. We waited, in that silence, deep within the folds of the ravine, with stones above us, frost beneath us, and breath clutched tight behind our teeth. The fire had long been stamped out, ash scattered. Any trace of warmth or smoke had been carefully erased. We hid behind what shadows we could find, beneath stones, inside narrow crevices, behind moss-grown boulders. Asa held her baby with both hands and wrapped her in a double layer of wool, praying the child would not cry. I pressed my back against cold stone, spear beside me, my hand already numb around the handle. Then they arrived. A flicker first, a lantern's glow cresting the lip of the ravine. 3 shadows followed. They stepped slowly, the leader holding his lantern high. His eyes gleamed beneath a wrapped turban, scanning the darkness with practiced patience. These were not common raiders. These were seekers, trained, silent. Their boots made little sound on the stone, and their weapons gleamed faintly with every movement. I could hear my pulse louder than their steps. One of them paused. He knelt, examined something on the ground, perhaps a scuff in the moss or the indentation of a heel. He said something in a tongue I did not know. The others fanned out, moving cautiously but with purpose. They were not guessing. They knew. And then, somewhere close behind me, a sound, a breath too loud, a cough caught in the throat, a baby's twitch. The lantern turned. The man pointed. I stood. I don't remember deciding. I only remember rising, tall and firm like a tree that refuses to fall in the storm. "Here!" I shouted. "Here, you devils!" I threw my fishing spear. It struck not flesh, but fire. The lantern. The glass exploded in a shower of flame and oil. For a moment the ravine lit up in wild orange, shadows flailing across the rock. Screams, steel, gunfire. I ran. I turned and shouted, "Run now! Up the path!" Thora was already moving, pulling Asa behind her. The sick and wounded crawled, then stumbled, then began to run as best they could. I shouted again, picked up a rock, and hurled it toward the advancing men. A shot rang out, the sharp, cracking blast of a musket. Stone exploded inches from my head. I kept running. The upper trail was steep. We scrambled, hands and knees, boots slipping. Behind me, voices yelled, sharp commands in that harsh foreign tongue. More boots, clattering now, less cautious, more urgent. We passed a bend, then another. I looked back once and saw one of the pirates silhouetted against the fire, his eyes glowing like coals. I threw another stone. He ducked, but he kept coming. We reached a narrow ledge, only wide enough for one at a time. I turned and pushed a loose rock over the side. It tumbled down, crashing into the path below. Another. Thora joined me, then Asa. Even the sick man, dragging his splintered leg, grabbed a stone and heaved. Below, the pirates hesitated. We didn't wait. We moved again, following the narrow trail into the dark, guided only by stars and the prayer that the land itself would shelter us once more. We ran until we couldn't run anymore. When at last we stopped, it was at the base of a slope thick with pine and shadow. The ravine was far behind us. Smoke still clung faintly to the wind, but we heard no pursuit. We collapsed. Thora fell beside me, chest heaving, hands scraped and bleeding. Asa clutched her child, eyes wide with unshed tears. The baby was silent, swaddled in her arms, her tiny face pale in the starlight. The sick man wept, quietly, bitterly. The others lay where they had fallen, not speaking, not moving, just breathing. And I, who had stood, who had shouted, who had thrown fire into the dark, I wept too, for the fear, for the others who might still be hiding in holes and barns and under broken floorboards, hoping for rescue that might never come, for the man I had been before this night. When my tears dried, I looked around. We were 6 left from 30, 6 shivering souls in the vast shadow of Iceland's cold spine. I sat beside Thora and held her hand. She leaned into me, her voice low. "You bought us time." "Not enough," I said. "Never is," she whispered. "But sometimes it's all we need." That night, we did not sleep. We huddled beneath the trees, cloaked in silence, and watched the stars move slowly overhead. And in the east, faint and distant, I saw the first light of dawn. A new day. We were still here, but the ravine, our last shelter, was lost. And we were alone again in a land that had once been home, but now held more danger than comfort. Still, we had survived. And the story was not yet done. We moved with the dawn, though it felt less like beginning and more like retreat. The sky above us bore no warmth, just a thin veil of light stretched across grey clouds. Beneath it, the earth was slick from dew and silence. Every step we took left a shallow imprint in the moss, like footsteps into memory itself. We were fewer now. Only 6 remained. We said no names, made no count aloud. The numbers clung in the back of the mind, like bruises beneath the skin. Thora led for a time. Her pace was steady, her hands still raw. Asa walked beside her, one arm wrapped around her baby, the other balancing herself against low tree branches. The child had not cried once since the flight from the ravine. She simply blinked, wide-eyed and silent, as if she too knew that sound could bring death. We followed an old sheep trail that curved east toward the coast, one I had walked many times in other seasons, searching for strays among the fog. It felt unfamiliar now. The stones were the same, the trees unmoved, but something had changed. Perhaps it was us. We spoke little. Only when the wind picked up did we hear it. The sea. A soft, rhythmic whisper. Distant but insistent, the waves brushing the shore with slow hands. The sound came like a lullaby to our ears, so strange to find comfort in something so vast and dangerous. We turned toward it, drawn by instinct more than decision. After hours of silent climbing and descent, we reached a ridge where the trees fell away. There it was. The water stretched far into the east, a steel mirror beneath the clouds. The waves rolled in quiet patterns, low and slow. It was a view I had known my whole life, yet in that moment, it seemed foreign. The same way a familiar song sounds different when played at a funeral. We rested on the ridge, watching the sea from above. Below, the land flattened into a stony beach. No boats, no figures, just driftwood, kelp, and the wide breathing of the tide. There was no sign of the pirates, not on the water, not along the cliffs. We could build a signal, Asa said softly, almost unsure if she meant it. For whom? I asked. There's no one left to come. Thora placed a hand on mine. There may be, she said. We're not the only ones who survived. She was right. Somewhere, scattered across fjords and forests, others might still be out there, fleeing, hiding, waiting. It gave me pause. I once heard of a cave, I said. On this shore, a tide cave, dry at low tide, hidden at high. I know it, said the man with the injured leg. North of here, behind the basalt arch. Could we reach it? Thora asked. He nodded slowly. If the tide is right, it became our destination. We waited until evening. The clouds shifted, and the low sun painted the sky in streaks of copper and ash. As the tide began to recede, we descended the final slope toward the sea. I carried the man on my back. Thora and Asa helped one another. The beach was strewn with debris, seaweed, driftwood, bones of gulls. The wind picked up again, and with it came the smell of salt and old storms. Then we saw it. The arch. A great curve of rock rising from the sand like the spine of some forgotten sea beast. And behind it, partly obscured by shadow and tide pool, the opening to the cave. We reached it just before the water would have turned us back. Inside, the cave opened wide, like a great ear turned toward the ocean's whisper. The walls were smooth, worn by centuries of tide. Above us, salt crystals sparkled faintly. It was cool, but dry. We were safe, for now. We laid the man down on a bed of sea moss. Asa fed the baby a few drops of water from her sleeve. Thora leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder, her eyes heavy with something deeper than sleep. Outside, the tide crept back, slowly sealing the entrance with darkness. And in that stillness, as waves whispered across the mouth of the cave, I remembered a story my father used to tell of selkies, spirits of the sea, women who wore sealskins and came ashore as humans. They danced under moonlight and vanished with the tide. He used to say, the sea gives and the sea takes, and not even the wind knows why. I thought of that now, of all it had taken and of what it might yet give back. We slept lightly that night, each of us wrapped in cloth and silence, curled near the wall like children in the womb of the earth. Somewhere beyond the cave, the water shifted, and I swore I heard something more than waves, a voice, or the echo of one, calling. But when I sat up, there was only darkness and the low, ceaseless breathing of the sea. When I finally drifted into sleep, it was not rest that found me, it was the tide. I dreamed of waves rising without sound, smooth and blue like polished stone. They rose not to crash, but to carry. Beneath the surface, faces floated, pale, familiar, unmoving, eyes closed, hair drifting like kelp in the current. Among them, my daughter Elida. She did not speak, only watched me with a gaze neither accusatory nor forgiving. I reached for her. The water slipped between us. When I awoke, my cheeks were wet, not from the sea, but from tears. The cave was dark still, but the air had changed, damp, heavier. The tide was turning. I rose slowly, joints aching, and stepped carefully toward the mouth of the cave. The others were still asleep. Thora curled beside the wall, arms around her knees. Asa and her child breathed in tandem, like one body. Even the injured man, wrapped in seaweed and wool, slept deeply, his face briefly untroubled. I stepped outside. The tide had drawn back, far into the distance. The beach glistened beneath a silver dawn. The world made of wet stone and pale sky. Small pools dotted the shoreline, traps of the sea, holding starfish and small darting fish left behind. The wind was low and hushed, as though the sea itself were listening. Then I saw it, a shape on the shore. At first I thought it was driftwood, long, smooth, darkened by water, but something about it felt deliberate. I stepped closer. The wind shifted, and with it came a faint scent. Salt, smoke, and something else. Metal. It was a boat, no more than 10 feet long, narrow, sleek, half covered in seaweed, but intact. Quickened my pace, heart pounding. It had no sail, no oars lay beside it, just a single empty hull, resting gently in the sand as if placed there by unseen hands. I reached it and crouched. Its sides were carved with shallow marks, not Icelandic, runes but older, curved and unfamiliar. Barnacles clung to one end, a leather strap, torn and frayed, hung from the stern. Inside, a wooden bowl, a net of fine weave, and, tucked beneath a damp cloth, 3 dried fish. I froze. This was no wreck. This was a vessel prepared, left, offered, or returned. I glanced. Down the beach, there were no tracks, no footprints, no sign of anyone living. But the tide could erase such things in minutes. I ran back to the cave. Thora was waking when I returned, rubbing her eyes. "There's a boat," I said, breath short. She looked at me, uncomprehending at first. "A boat," I repeated. "Down the beach, intact, supplies inside." Her eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I am of you." Within minutes we gathered outside, 6 figures blinking against the rising light, drawn toward the tide's gift. The man with the injured leg could not walk, but he insisted on being carried. "If there's escape," he said, "I'd rather die trying than rot in hiding." We reached the boat. Silence fell again. Asa touched the side of the hull. "This is not of Iceland," she murmured. "Not Norse, not Danish. But it floats," said Thora, "and it has food." I climbed in. It rocked gently beneath me. There was space for 3, perhaps 4, tightly packed, not 6, not even 5. My heart sank. "This is no rescue," I said quietly. "It's a decision." We all understood at once. Someone would have to stay behind. Asa looked at her child, then at me. "You should take her," she said. "She's young. You're strong. The rest of us will..." We'll find another way." "No," Thora said firmly. "We don't split again. Not like before." The injured man cleared his throat. "I am already fading. I know it. I'll not waste space. That might save another." "And leave you here alone?" I asked. He smiled grimly. "I've been alone since my wife was taken. But if this boat came in with the tide, maybe another will." I looked again at the sea. It whispered still, not hostile, not welcoming, just present, watching. We spent an hour debating, measuring, weighing, praying. In the end, we made a decision. We would stay one more day, build a signal, watch the tide. If no more came, 2 would leave at dusk, Asa and the baby. The rest would wait. Take turns, see if the sea would offer again. That afternoon, we worked silently. We built a cairn of stones. We laid out seaweed in long lines, symbols of distress. Thora tore a strip from her dress and tied it to a driftwood pole, planting it in the sand. We waited, and as the sun dipped low, something strange occurred. Out on the horizon, just at the edge of sight. A shape. Another, low and dark, gliding toward the shore. I stood, mouth dry. Thora joined me, her hand in mine. Another boat. Not a dream, but a question, and perhaps an answer. The tide had gone out again. We could feel it even before we saw it. Something in the way the cave breathed differently. How the dampness in the air stretched a little longer. How the quiet outside was thicker than usual, like snow before it falls. Morning had passed without notice. None of us slept well. The hush of the cave was not comfort, but waiting. It was Asa who noticed it first. She stood just beyond the rocks, holding her daughter against her chest. Her voice was low, more thought than speech. "There's another," she said. I was on my feet before I understood what she meant. Thora followed, and soon we all gathered at the edge of the beach, 6 weary souls against the dull light of afternoon. Out there, beyond the first ripple of tide, a shape moved with the water. It was a boat, not the same as the one we'd found before. This one bore a thin mast and a strip of faded sail that flapped limply like the torn edge of a dream. It came not fast, but with purpose, as if guided by something older than wind. It rose gently on the swells and lowered again, always forward, never rushed. We said nothing as it neared. The hull was long and dark, its wood water-worn and crusted with a dusting of salt. At its centre sat a figure, alone, cloaked, still. He did not row, he did not steer. He merely sat with one hand on the rail and the other resting in his lap. His gaze fixed not on the shore, but beyond it, as though we were only the beginning of his arrival. When the boat touched the sand with barely a sound, it felt less like a docking and more like the sea had delivered something it had kept hidden far too long. I approached slowly. He did not look at me at first. His head was bowed, slightly, the edge of his cloak falling just below his eyes. His beard was grey and uneven. His skin, brown, weathered, creased deeply, spoke of long travel under cruel sun. When I reached him, he lifted his gaze. His eyes were dark, but not cold. They studied me, as if I were not a stranger, but a puzzle half solved. I did not speak immediately, neither did he. Then I said quietly, "You've come far." He nodded once. "Further than I remember," he answered. Thora came beside me, Asa too. The others stood just beyond the rocks watching. "Do you come alone?" Thora asked. The man turned to her and smiled, not warmly, not coldly, just knowingly. "For now," he said. His voice was roughened by time, but calm, like river stone worn smooth by use. "We've seen no one," I said, trying to keep my voice from tightening. "Only you and the boat before you." "You'll see more," he said. "The tide moves slowly, but it brings what is owed." It was not an answer, but it was not a threat. "Where are you from?" I asked. He tilted, his head slightly, wherever the sea forgets to remember. It made no sense, but somehow I understood. He stood then, tall and lean, yet not frail. His cloak parted slightly, revealing clothing patched from many cultures. Sealskin at the hem, linen dyed in the shades of southern sand, buttons shaped from carved bone. He stepped down into the wet sand, and we did not stop him. His bare feet left no mark. Behind him, in the hull of the boat, we saw several wrapped parcels. Supplies, perhaps. A coiled net. A clay flask. Beside them, something else. A stone. Smooth. Round. Etched with a spiral. He reached for it and placed it in my hand. "The sea leaves these where stories wait to change," he said. I looked at the stone. I could not read its markings, but I felt them. He walked past us, toward the cave. We followed. Inside, he sat near the fire pit where no fire burned and pulled a bit of dried seaweed from his pouch. He chewed it slowly, his eyes on the stone walls. He asked no questions, offered no tales. We did not press him. The sun dipped toward evening. Outside, the second boat sat on the sand, waiting. The man finally spoke as the first stars blinked above the horizon. "I was once taken," he said, "from a shore like this one, as a boy, by men who spoke neither mercy nor my name. I served them. I survived them. And then I left them." Silence. I walked across cities made of dust. I slept beneath domes of glass. I watched empires forget themselves. Then I returned. He paused, then added, "No one ever believes they will be the last of their people, until they are." Thora quietly asked, "Are you?" He did not answer. Later that night, we sat together at the mouth of the cave. The boats, two now, rested just beyond the reach of tide. I held the spiral stone in my hand and wondered what part of me it belonged to. Behind us, the stranger slept with one hand over his chest, and the sea whispered. The sea opened just after dawn. We had watched it retreat for hours in the pale light, slipping backward with each hush and roll, as though the tide itself were drawing a breath too long held. The sky above was soft, a grey-blue hush veiled in silver mist. The salt air clung gently to the rocks and to our skin, and the seaweed strewn across the sand gave off the quiet perfume of time, earthy, distant, strange. The boats were ready. Two now, side by side. The first, small and silent. The second, larger and marked by the journey of the cloaked stranger who now slept with his head resting against the cave wall, a spiral stone clutched loosely in one hand. We had not asked his name again. There are some truths too wide to hold with a single word. The rest of us gathered what we could. There was little left, scraps of dried root, a fish caught and gutted the day before, and water gathered from the stones during the rain. Thora helped Asa wrap her baby in layers of wool, tying the cloth carefully over her shoulders. The child blinked, quiet as always, her eyes wide as the sea she would soon cross. I stood beside the boats, watching the edge of the tide draw farther, revealing the sandbars we would need to cross. If we waited too long, they would vanish beneath the flood once more, and the boats would be held fast by the turning sea. If we left too soon, the weight of us might drag them too low, too early. It was a delicate balance, like everything else in this broken world. The stranger rose without a sound and joined us near the boats. He looked out over the water for a long moment before speaking. "The tide will hold for a while longer," he said. "But not forever." We nodded. Thora stepped forward, placing her hand on Asa's shoulder. "You must go first," she said gently. "You and the child. We will follow, if the sea allows it." Asa hesitated. Her fingers clutched her daughter as though the child were her very soul, made small and warm and helpless. "I don't want to leave you," she whispered. Thora smiled, a sadness in her eyes. "That's how I know you must." The younger woman nodded once, then climbed carefully into the first boat. The child did not cry. She sat upright, bright-eyed, as if she had already travelled many seas. The stranger stepped in next. He said nothing. He did not ask who would guide the boat. He simply sat near the stern, laid his hands on either side, and waited. I gave Asa the pouch with our last store of food. She reached for my hand and squeezed it. "If I make it," she said, "I'll—" "Wait, I swear it. You'll make it," I said. Thora placed a kiss on the baby's forehead, and then the tide gave its nod. The boat slid into the water, light and sure, gliding over the exposed sandbar like a seal breaking free of snow. We watched them go. None of us waved. We stood in silence, listening to the dip of water, the tug of current, the whisper of a journey just beginning. When the boat passed the last visible ridge of stone, it vanished into the early morning mist, a shadow swallowed by the ocean's breath. I turned to the second boat. Thora looked at me. "It won't carry all of us." "No," I said. The injured man stepped forward. His face was pale but steady. "Then I'll stay." "You've already stayed," I replied. "This one is ours." He smiled faintly, as if the decision had been made long ago. "I've never seen the Faroe Islands," he said, "or even the mainland. I thought I'd die with goats." "You may still," Thora said. And for a moment, we almost laughed. He settled beside the rock wall again, pulling the last of the wool over his knees. We packed the second boat quickly. Stones for balance, nets to shield the child, a single shard of mirror to catch the sun if needed. The stranger had left another spiral stone behind, resting on the seat near the prow, a gift or a guide. The sea reached again toward the land, brushing the boats as though testing them. The tide was beginning to turn. "It's time," I said. Thora stepped into the boat first. I pushed it back, let the water take it, then climbed in after her. We drifted. The sand gave way beneath us. The pull of the ocean grew stronger, and behind us, the cave, the last of the hiding places, shrank until it was no more than a fold in the rock. The man with the broken leg raised a hand as we vanished into the mist, and we, two survivors in a wooden shell, let the sea take us. It was not rescue, it was not freedom, but it was motion. And after all we had lost, motion was enough. Salt was the first thing I tasted that morning. It rested on my lips, seeped into my tongue, and curled at the back of my throat like a memory. The sky above was a pale wash of grey and blue, softened by early light. Wisps of cloud floated without, purpose, like smoke long after fire. Around us, only sea, stretching in every direction, patient and unconcerned. We drifted, Thora and I, in the second of the two tide-borne boats. There was no sail, no oars. The tide did the work, as if we were not passengers, but offerings sent from shore to shore. The sea had become our pathway, and also our master. We had no choice but to yield. Thora sat opposite me, wrapped in the last of our wool, her eyes half closed beneath the hood of her shawl. She looked peaceful, but I knew better. I could see the tightness in her jaw, the way her hands gripped the rim of the boat when the waves shifted. Her strength had never shouted. It had always stood quietly beside me, like a wall against the wind. Neither of us spoke for some time. The rhythm of the water did not allow for urgency. It was a cradle and a weight. Each rise and fall pulled us farther from the world we knew and deeper into a space between memory and becoming. I looked to the horizon. Nothing, only sky and sea. The line between them had blurred. "Do you think they've landed?" Thora asked softly. It took me a moment to understand her. "Asa?" I asked. She nodded. "I think so," I said. "I hope so." You always say that. I glanced at her. What? You always say, I think so, and then, I hope so, as if your heart and your mind are constantly in disagreement. I smiled, despite the ache behind my ribs. Aren't they always? She gave a slight shrug and looked toward the sea again. I dreamt of John last night, she said after a while. He was building a bird trap, the kind he used to make with sticks and string. But every time the bird landed, it just walked away, untouched. Did he say anything? She shook her head. Just kept setting it again, over and over. I closed my eyes. The thought of him, the stubborn tilt of his head, the quiet way he worked, stung sharper than the salt wind. He would have been 12 this spring. I remembered the first time he tried to fish with me, how he dropped the net into the water backwards and tangled the rope around his own foot. He'd looked up at me, mortified, waiting to be scolded, but I had only laughed. I'd forgotten that until now. The boat rocked gently, reminding us we were still adrift. I don't want to forget them, I said. You won't. But the sea washes everything. It doesn't, Thora said. It only hides it. What matters, it keeps. I looked down at the planks beneath us, at the spiral stone left behind by the cloaked stranger, still resting near my foot. Smooth, dark, ancient. I picked it up and turned it in my hand. Do you think he was real? I asked. She didn't answer for a long moment. Then she said, I think grief makes prophets of ordinary men. That felt truer than anything else I'd heard in weeks. Above us, the sky shifted. The clouds thinned slightly, and light broke through in pale shafts, like fingers reaching for the sea. A breeze picked up, gentle but insistent, and the boat responded, drifting at a slight angle now, more east than north. Thora pointed. There, I followed her gaze. On the far edge of sight, something broke the horizon. At first it looked like mist, but mist moves. This did not. A rise, a shadow, land. I sat up straighter. It could be cloud, I said. Could be, but it wasn't. As the boat drew closer, the shape became clearer. Low cliffs, scattered green, the suggestion of slope. We couldn't yet see trees or people, but we saw stillness. Earth above water, the promise of ground. Thora exhaled softly. We'll make it. If the tide allows, I said. It brought us this far. I nodded. We ate the last of our food, half a strip of dried fish, a few bitter leaves gathered before we left. The water skin was nearly empty, but we drank a little, enough to speak without pain. Time slowed again as we approached. Seabirds appeared, swooping overhead. Their cries were sharp and sudden, breaking the long quiet. It startled us both and then comforted us. Life. Movement. Signs. Then, just before the sun reached its peak, we heard it. A bell. Faint. Far. One single tone. It echoed across the water like a question. We turned to each other at once. A church, I asked. Thora's brow furrowed. Or a warning. But the sound came again. Once more. Then silence. We drifted on. Closer. Closer. Each moment between wave and answer. Between salt and sky. The boat touched the shore with the gentleness of a sigh. There was no crash, no sudden pull against the stones, only the soft settling of hull on sand, the hush of the tide surrendering us to land once more. We had followed the sound, the bell, one chime, then silence. Then again, a distant ring through mist and memory. Now it was still. I stepped ashore first, boots sinking slightly into the pebbled strand. Thora followed, slower, her shawl drawn tight, her eyes fixed on the slope ahead. The sea behind us seemed momentarily content, neither retreating nor reaching, simply resting. Its work, perhaps, was done. The air smelled of salt and heather, of something old and familiar. Before us rose a path. It wasn't marked, not truly, not with stones or carvings, but it was there nonetheless. A thinning of grass, a slight hollow. In the earth, The kind of trail made not by tools, but by footsteps repeated across generations. A path forgotten by maps, but remembered by feet. We followed it. The wind was gentle, moving just enough to carry the faint scent of thyme and wet moss. Birds wheeled above, gulls mostly, with their long, lonely cries, but occasionally a darker shape moved among them, silent and swift. The slope rose steadily. With each step, we left the sea farther behind, and the bell became clearer, not in volume, but in presence. It did not ring again, but I could feel it, like a pulse in the stone beneath my boots. At the crest of the hill, we found it, a chapel, small, ancient, folded into the landscape like a sleeping creature that had long ago ceased expecting visitors. Its walls were of rough stone, worn smooth by wind and weather. Moss crept up its sides, and wildflowers bloomed in the cracks. The roof was thatch, faded to grey. A single wooden beam extended above the doorway, and from it hung the bell. It did not move, and yet it had. We stood before the chapel without speaking. Its door hung slightly ajar, not broken, not blown open, just enough to suggest welcome without invitation. There were no carvings on the lintel, no sigils or saints to mark it holy or profane. It simply was. Thora reached for my hand. I took hers. Together, we stepped inside. The air within was cool and still. Light entered through a single slit above, the altar, falling in a shaft of dusty gold. There were benches, 3, uneven and low, and at the far end a raised stone slab, the altar. No candles burned. No incense clung to the air, and yet the space felt full, not of people, of memory. Behind the altar, carved into the stone wall, was a single symbol. A spiral, the same as the stone in my pouch. I stepped forward. The floor creaked softly underfoot, though it was stone. My hand found the spiral stone before my mind called for it. I drew it out, fingers curled around its smooth weight. It felt warm, not from my body, but from being held, from being meant for this place. I reached the altar. Shallow bowl sat at its center, stone, like the altar itself, not ornate, not ceremonial, just a curve to catch something left behind. I looked at Thora. She nodded once. I placed the stone in the bowl. Nothing happened. The light did not shift. The air did not stir. But the silence grew deeper, richer, like the pause before song. We sat on the first bench, side by side. My shoulder brushed hers. She reached into her satchel and drew out a small cloth, embroidered, once white, now yellowed with salt and thyme. It had belonged to Elida. She laid it beside the altar. Then, from my pocket, I took the tiny carved horse Jon had made, his first attempt, crooked and proud. I placed it gently near the cloth. We had no token of Brynja, not one, but Thora sang, then, a lullaby, old, Icelandic, barely above a whisper, the one she used to sing when snow piled at the door and wind howled across the roof. The melody drifted into the stone and settled there, as if it had waited to return. When her voice fell silent, the bell outside rang, once, clear, steady, final, and we wept, not for what was lost, but for what we had been allowed to remember. Not all grief destroys. Some of it roots, some of it grows, and, in this place, this chapel without name or cross, we found space enough to carry it, to be its keeper, to let it live beside us, instead of within. We remained there as the light changed, neither pilgrims nor wanderers now, just people who had come through salt and fire to a hill where a bell waited, not to call them, but to receive them, and the sea, far below, continued its breathing. The chapel held its silence like a mother holds a sleeping child, softly, carefully, not daring to stir the peace that had finally come. We had not spoken since dawn. There was no need. The stone walls around us were not built for conversation, but for stillness, for remembrance, for the quiet gathering of things too fragile to name aloud. The bell had not rung again since the morning light found the spiral stone on the altar. It didn't need to. Its work, for now, was done. I sat on one of the rough benches with my back straight and hands folded over my lap, as if expecting someone to come through the door and ask a question I'd spent my whole life preparing to answer. But no one came, only Thora's breath beside me, steady and near. Her hands rested on the spiral cloth she'd taken from her satchel, the one she'd sewn long ago for Elida, stitched with tiny stars and crooked letters from when our daughter first learned. To trace her name. I wonder, Thora said quietly, if there are other chapels like this. I turned to her. You think it's part of something larger? I don't know, she replied. Maybe not a church. Maybe not anything someone meant to build. But a place like this grows from need, from silence, from longing. She reached forward, fingers brushing the edge of the altar. Grief builds strange architecture. I rose and stepped around the altar. There, near the base, the morning light revealed what we had not seen in the dusk the day before. Markings, scores of them, some shallow, some deep, some weathered to nearly nothing. Not names exactly, not in any script I knew, but lines, spirals, incomplete circles, clusters of hash marks, like someone counting hours or years or lives. I knelt to look closer. Names, I whispered. Thora joined me, or the shapes names leave behind. We touched, them reverently, like bones beneath the soil. Some were newer, some old enough that lichen had taken root inside their grooves. I reached into my coat and withdrew the piece of driftwood John had once carved into the shape of a horse. The legs had snapped long ago, but the tiny head still bore the notches of his careful knife. Without thinking, I placed it at the foot of the altar. Thora did the same with the cloth. She smoothed it flat, then folded it once, twice, and tucked it between two stones near the base, as if laying it to rest. Neither of us spoke their names. Not yet. Instead, Thora stood and stepped into the center of the chapel. She tilted her face upward toward the narrow shaft of light. Then she said calmly, like a priestess to no god at all, I offer you the names of those I failed to protect. Her voice did not rise. It did not echo, but it filled the space. I offer you John, she said, Elida, Brynja. Each name came like a breath drawn from deep water. She turned to me. I nodded, and together we spoke them again, not with weeping, not with pleading, but with memory and love, and the strange, beautiful finality that comes when you speak what once tore you and find it does not destroy you now. The bell rang. One note, then silence, but not absence. It was as if the names had joined the chapel, had taken shape in the stone, or the dust, or the light. We sat again, not as mourners, not as pilgrims, but simply as what we were. Two souls who had come to the edge of the world and still found breath. After a time, Thora spoke. What now? I looked toward the chapel door, half open still. We leave something of ourselves here, I said, and carry the rest forward. She nodded. We stood. At the threshold, I turned once more to look. The altar still bore the spiral stone. The air still held their names. And though the wind outside had picked up, the bell remained still, as if it, too, were listening. We stepped out into the world again. The sky above was wider than it had been, or perhaps our eyes were just more open. The land stretched before us, not wild, but waiting. There were footprints in the earth near the chapel's path, not ours, older, barely visible, but there. A reminder that we were not the first to come seeking shelter in grief, and not perhaps the last. As we walked down the slope, toward a valley we had not seen the day before, I felt no pull of map or memory, only purpose, the kind that comes after loss, when the heart begins to trust silence again, Behind us, the chapel stood quiet. Its stones bore no plaque. Its door bore no name, but we had named it now, not aloud, not carved in wood, but in what we left behind, the chapel of forgotten names, and it would remember. The valley opened before us like the palm of a quiet hand. We left the chapel with slow steps, not from weariness, but from the weight of what we had just placed in its walls. Names no longer trapped inside us, now drifted behind like dandelion, seeds, unrooted, but sacred. The wind felt different, not warm, but not indifferent either. The kind of air that holds the breath of someone watching. We followed the faint path along the hillside, between low rises of heather and stone. The sky above had begun to brighten, soft light veiled in silver clouds, and somewhere far beyond, the sea whispered its distant hush, no longer behind us, but always beside. Then, through a fold in the hill, we saw it again. The house, low-roofed, half sunk into the landscape. Smoke rose from its chimney in a steady line, thin and unhurried. There were no fences, no gate, no warning, just the shape of shelter where none had been promised, and someone stood before it, a single figure, still as a root wrapped in wool, tall and lean. Their face was hidden beneath a hood, but their hands were bare, weathered, long-fingered, motionless at their sides. We paused. Thora tightened her grip on my hand, but did not speak. Then, slowly, the figure raised their right hand, not in alarm, in welcome. A quiet, open gesture. We approached, step by cautious step, hearts uncertain, but not yet afraid. As we neared, the figure lowered their hand and lifted their head. The hood fell back, revealing a face marked not by age, but by weather and knowledge. Lines around the eyes, ash-coloured hair braided into a cord over one shoulder. It was a woman. She did not smile, but her eyes were steady. She looked at me, then at Thora, and then at the chapel on the distant hill. "I heard the bell," she said. Her voice was low, rough as birch bark, but not unkind. We said nothing. She nodded once. "It does not ring for everyone." I took a breath. "We didn't mean to disturb it." "You didn't." Her gaze lingered on us both. "You answered it." Thora stepped forward, her voice calm. "Is this your land?" The woman tilted her head. "I've walked it long enough to call it mine, but no deed binds it. Only story." "Are we intruding?" "No. You are returning." It was not a riddle. It was not explanation. But it settled something in me I had not known was still restless. She stepped aside. "The fire is lit," she said. "You look like those who've been cold a long time." We followed her inside. The house was not large, but it held warmth in every corner. A hearth burned low at its centre. The air smelled of moss and barley, of smoke and thyme. Dry herbs hung from the ceiling. Along the far wall, shelves lined with clay jars and carved bowls. A single bench beside the fire, with a sheepskin laid across it. "Sit," she said. We did. She poured water into a kettle and placed it near the coals. Then she sat opposite us on a low stool, hands folded loosely. "I am called Sigrun," she said. Her name rang faintly familiar, like a name from a song half remembered. "I am Björn. This is Thora." She nodded, as though she already knew. There was a silence. Not uncomfortable, just full. Then she said, "You've lost what cannot be found." We did not reply. She looked to the flames. "But you carry it still." Thora reached into her satchel and drew out the folded cloth. She placed it on her lap, her fingers smoothing its creased edges. Sigrun did not touch it, did not ask. She simply looked and said, "The land holds what we give it." I leaned forward. "Is this place a village?" It was. Long ago. What happened? Time happened. Fire, tide, hunger, the same things that happen everywhere. Her voice was not bitter, merely old. Are you alone here? She smiled faintly. Not all who live here are seen. The kettle began to whistle. She poured 3 cups and passed them without ceremony. The drink was dark, bitter, herbal. But it warmed the belly. We sipped in silence. After a time, Sigrun stood and walked to a small wooden chest by the window. She opened it and withdrew something wrapped in linen. With great care, she placed it on the table between us. A book, bound in hide, worn smooth. She opened it. Inside, names, pages of them, some in runes, some in Latin, some scratched like marks of bone. She handed me a piece of charcoal. Add them, she said. I looked to Thora. She nodded. I wrote Elida, Jon, Brynja. Beneath them, I placed our own names. Not to mark survival, but to mark that we had remembered. Sigrun closed the book and replaced it gently in the chest. Then she looked at us and said, "You are not done." We knew the road continued, but tonight there would be fire and someone to sit beside it. We left the warmth of Sigrun's hearth just as the first breath of morning touched the valley. There were no farewells, no embraces or last words. Only a simple nod from her, solemn and knowing, and the soft creak of her wooden door closing behind us. Her fire had steadied us. Her silence had accepted us. And now the path opened once again before our feet. We walked without speaking, not from coldness, but because some silences are so full they leave no room for words. Ahead, the land began to rise, folding gently into a swell of wooded hills. The grass grew thicker here, wilder. Tufts of heather dotted the trail, and the occasional rock bore flecks of lichen shaped like old runes. Then we came upon the ash trees. They stood like sentinels on either side of the path, tall, silver and still, their limbs bare but budding, reaching upward like hands longing for sky. Their bark shimmered faintly in the weak sun, smooth and pale, whispering with every light breeze that threaded between them. We stepped beneath their canopy, and it was as if the world hushed. The forest was not silent, no, but it was reverent. There were faint sounds, the creak of a distant bough, the soft rustle of something unseen among the roots, the rhythmic beating of our own footsteps on damp earth. But no birds called, no voices rose. It felt like a temple, one not built by man. The path beneath us had no paving stones, but it bore the unmistakable mark of passage, pressed grasses, occasional wheel ruts long filled with soil, and footprints that had faded into memory. I glanced sideways at Thora. Her face was calm now. Pale still, yes, and drawn, but no longer hollow. Her eyes, once dulled by loss, had taken on a quiet clarity. She walked with her chin high and her steps firm, no longer escaping, simply continuing. "Do you hear them?" she asked suddenly. I paused. "Who?" She gestured to the trees. "The ones who've walked before us. I think their stories are in the roots." I said nothing, but I believed her. We walked on. The trees grew closer together the deeper we went, their trunks forming narrow corridors of shadow and filtered light. Patches of moss spread like green velvet across the path. Tiny white flowers bloomed between stones. And then we heard it. Music. Not from strings nor pipe, but from a voice. Low and weathered, humming a tune older than melody, as if someone were recalling the shape of a lullaby long forgotten. We slowed. The sound came from just beyond a bend in the grove. We followed it, and in a clearing framed by the tall ash trees, we saw him. An old man sat upon the edge of a ruined wagon. Its wheels were sunken into the soil, its frame half rotted and covered in ivy. He wore a heavy cloak patched in places, and his boots were muddied from many roads. His hands were busy weaving thin strips of bark into a spiral. He did not startle, When we appeared, he looked up and smiled, gently, with eyes that had seen far and judged little. "You've come through the ash," he said. "They let you pass." Thora gave a nod. "They remember us," she replied. The man nodded in return, as if they'd shared a secret language. He gestured to 2 stones placed across from his seat. "Rest a while. There's no rush here." We obeyed. The moss was soft. Beneath us, the grove quiet, yet awake. "You carry names," he said, eyes resting on me. "Not just your own." I nodded. He returned to his weaving. "I've been binding spirals for near 40 years, he said. "People leave them here. Some plant them. Some burn them. Some keep them until they don't need them anymore." He handed the spiral he'd just finished to Thora. "For what you lost," he said, "and for what still waits." She took it carefully, cradling it like something fragile. I asked, "Do you live here?" He chuckled. "I remain." "Why?" "Because the road still speaks, and the trees know when to listen." He pointed beyond the clearing. "The path forks soon. One way leads down, towards salt air and settlements. The other climbs, into wind and silence." Thora looked to me. I answered quietly, "We go where our names echo." The man smiled once more. "Then you already know." He reached for another strip of bark, his fingers already shaping memory into form. We rose. Before leaving, I placed a stone on the edge of his wagon, smooth and dark, from the beach where our journey had begun. He said nothing, but his hands stilled for a moment in silent thanks, and then we walked into the trees, toward the fork, toward the path that climbed. The wind found us before we reached the summit. Not a gale, but something insistent, full and patient, like a voice carried through hollow stone. It rose through the ash grove, following us along the narrow trail as it curved upward into thinner air and bare rock. We climbed, each footfall pressed into soil now pale with stone dust. The trees thinned, yielding to sweep of wind and sky. Thora's shawl tightened around her shoulders. I held her hand tighter still. We did not speak. Words felt small. The northern sky had grown so vast above us, it swallowed any stray thought. By the time we reached the crest, a tongue of mist curled around the rocks. The world beyond blurred, sea miles off to the west, fields and glens to the east. Between us and everything lay only air and the long trace of the path we had walked. The wind circled. It had a shape. Names. I closed my eyes. Could I hear them in the rush around my ears? I felt echoes. A child's laugh, a prayer, a promise whispered into dark. They came and went in a current of memory, woven into the wind like threads in a tapestry. The crest opened to a stony step. Heather and scattered, grass clung to wind-hardened ground. It felt older than the hill, older than the land itself, a place where earth remembered storms and time. Thora stepped ahead, unfastening her shawl. "I want to feel it," she said. I let her go. She stood at the edge, arms open, face tilted into the wind. The air rippled her hair, filled her breath, and drew a soft sound from her lips, half sigh, half song. I watched her until I felt the wind press against me too, and then I joined her. We stood side by side, not speaking, just listening. Above, the sky shifted, pale light filtering through, high clouds. Below, the valley opened again, a weave of green and stone and hidden water. The path curled back into the places we had been and the places we had left behind. Here, the names we carried no longer felt like burdens. They were wind-etched, shapes, in the air, alive. I reached into my pocket and found the ashbark spiral. It was light, tiny, fragile, but steady. I placed it at our feet, on a flat stone, pressing it into a fissure where moss would someday hide it, protect it, let it grow. It felt right. Thora did the same, mine for Brynja, hers for John, a single act. We waited. The wind answered, not with voice but with motion. It drifted across blades of grass, sighed through rock seams, and circled our spirals once before moving on. And then, a distant sound. Not the bell, not voices. A chant, rhythmic, soft, like someone turning the centuries in their mind, measure by measure, breath by breath. We stood listening, bodies stilling. The chant grew faintly louder. A series of syllables rolled in clusters, rising and falling as the wind brought them near, then lost. "It's the wind," I said. Thora shook her head. "No," she said. "Something else." We followed the trail downward, slowly, carefully. The chant wavered, dissolved, reformed. It led us along a spur of rock towards something hidden below the ridge. The land fell away to a cirque of grey shale. At its centre, a depression sunk between boulders, woven with grass and drained by a tiny stream. In its heart, stone slabs lay flat, arranged in a pattern like a celestial chart. Around them, the chant pulsed, not from stone, from air, from space. We stepped onto the slabs. The chant grew stronger, like the wind shaping itself into sound. A language we did not know, yet some syllables carried familiarity, like lullabies learned in sleep, words lost to our mouths, but held in memory. I reached out to Thora. Her eyes glowed. They trembled. It was a place older than any man, older than any loss, a place where names were kept, not in stone, not in book, but in the movement of air through rock. We waited. The chant became a circulation, a dance of breath and current. The wind tugged at our clothes, our hair. It brushed our hands. It carried a voice, even if no mouth spoke. And then, as quickly as it came, the sound faded. Silence returned, but it was not empty. It was full of possibility. Possibility born. When names are spoken not into ears, but into space itself, and heard by something larger than memory. We stood together, at the heart of the wind. The air no longer felt cold. It felt held. I looked at Thora. She looked at me. No words, only knowing. We touched the spirals at our feet. We turned, and we walked back up the ridge. The chant not heard, but carried. In us, in the wind. The mountains did not rise. They waited. Still. Immense. Watchful. As we stepped onto the high path, their peaks emerged slowly, veiled in cloud and silence. Not like conquerors, but as old gods, long since weary of being worshipped. Their presence was not a challenge, but a reminder. Here, the world is older than pain, older than memory, older than names. We walked beneath that reminder. The trail became rockier, narrower, its edges broken by time and wind. Moss clung to the cracks. The air grew thinner, cooler. Every breath felt earned. Behind us, the ash grove disappeared in mist. Before us, stone and sky. Thora said nothing, but she walked steadily, her pace unbroken by incline. Her eyes scanned the ridgelines, her face neither afraid nor hardened. There was something calm in her, like a river that had finally found its true direction. I followed her steps, trusting their rhythm more than my own. The path turned sharply, curving into a shallow saddle between two outcrops. Wind rose, steady and low, not fierce but full of purpose. It pulled at our cloaks and whispered around our ears, carrying nothing but breath and the smell of stone. And then it stopped. So suddenly, so completely, that it felt as if the mountain itself had exhaled once, and then waited. We had reached the plateau. It was small, simple, a flat stretch of stone ringed by low grass and a few ancient boulders, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of sky. No trees grew here, no bird called, no trace of man's hand remained, only the land, shaped by patience. At the center stood a circle of stones, 7, evenly spaced, tall, narrow, uncarved. They were not monuments, they were listeners. Thora stepped toward them without hesitation. She walked to the center of the ring, placed one hand on her chest, the other on her stomach, and closed her eyes. I watched her, unsure whether to move, until she opened her eyes again and beckoned me in. The moment I crossed into the circle, the air changed. It did not grow colder, but more full. Full of what? I could not say. Expectation, perhaps, or memory, or listening. We stood in silence, surrounded by the stones, surrounded by the sky. No echo returned our breaths. No wind stirred. Yet I felt a pressure, soft but undeniable, like standing in a church before any prayer is spoken. When the room itself is holding its breath, Thora whispered, "Say them." And I did. I spoke their names, one at a time. Elida Jon. Brynja. Their names hung there, not shouted into the sky, but placed gently in the air between us and the stones. They did not echo. They settled. Thora spoke next. Not names, but memories. She told the mountain how Elida once hid a robin's egg in her apron, trying to hatch it with the heat of her chest. She described John's way of counting the stars aloud, even when clouds covered them, and how Brynja, the youngest, never cried when thunder came, but would instead hum back to it, as if in reply. Each memory she spoke felt like a small stone placed gently at the base of each standing monolith. I spoke, too, of the way Elida carved her initials into the dock post, too high for anyone but me to see, of John's crooked wooden boat, which never floated but was always launched, of Brynja's little song about the moon. No words, just a rise and fall of voice like a wave learning to sing. We emptied our hearts, not with sorrow, but with offering, not pleading for return, but declaring that they had lived, that they had been, that they had changed the world, if only for us. And then came the wind, soft, slow, rising from nowhere and everywhere at once. It moved through the stone ring not like a gale, but like an answer, a presence, not shaped in language, not formed of voice, but full of knowing. It circled once, brushing our faces, lifting the corners of Thora's shawl, and then one of the stones gave a sound, not a crack, not a groan, a hum. Low, slow note, as if stone had remembered a song, and in that sound, I felt the names again. Not lost, not gone, but carried by the world, not vanished, transformed. Thora wept, not with grief, but with relief. We knelt on the ground together, hands in the moss and stone, and we let the mountain hold us. No answers came, but the listening remained, and that was enough. When we rose, dusk had begun its descent. The peaks caught the last light like bowls catching rain. We walked from the ring in silence. The wind did not return. The mountains did not move. But I knew, in the hush of that high place, that they had heard and that they would remember. The descent began in hush, not because the land was silent, but because something in us had quieted. We left the circle of stone behind, that high place of listening and presence, and took the narrow path that wound its way along the mountain's shoulder, edging down like a thread stitched into cloth, long forgotten. The air remained still, and the peaks above us did not recede. They simply watched. Thora walked a few paces ahead, her steps unhurried, as if she followed something not seen but sensed. Perhaps it was the pull of the earth beneath us, or the scent of water on the wind. Whatever it was, I felt it too, a direction that had nothing to do with maps. The light changed. At first, it was hard to notice. Then suddenly, the ridgeline curved away, and the path opened to a wide green basin below, held gently between 3 arms of low hills. The sun veiled for most of our journey. now slipped through a break in the clouds and cast its light across the land like a benediction, and that is how we entered the Vale of Returning Light. It was not named on any chart. No signs led us there, but it bore the title in the way it received us, as though light had once fled from this place, and now, after a long exile, had come back to stay. The grass in the vale was tall and soft, touched by gold. The river that ran through it moved slowly, without urgency, curling around stones and roots with the patience of time itself. A few willows leaned toward the water, their leaves trembling not with wind, but with memory. We made no camp, not right away. Instead, we walked the river's edge, following its turns, its voice, a hush, a gurgle, a sigh. The world felt new, as if washed and left to dry in the sun. Every step felt like a beginning. Near the bend where the river widened, we found a smooth patch of ground beneath a tree shaped by years of leaning eastward. Its bark was pale and peeled in long curls. Moss covered one side of its roots and, between its branches, hung a nest, empty now, but built with care. We placed our packs down and sat, then lay back and breathed. The light around us softened, no longer bright, but warm. It fell across our faces, our arms, the stones at our feet. Thora took off her boots and placed her toes into the water. She laughed softly. "I used to dream of a place like this," she said. "A place where nothing chased me." I looked at her, but said nothing. Some truths don't need response. After a while, she reached into her satchel and brought out 3 stones, smooth, worn, carried from the coast. I recognized them, the ones she had touched in silence. Again and again, each night, we made shelter. She placed them on the earth, spaced just so. "Not for graves," she said, "for grounding." She picked a few flowers from the riverbank, small yellow blossoms and pale star-shaped ones, and tucked them beside the stones. Then she sat cross-legged before them and whispered 3 names, Elida, John, Brynja. She did not cry, nor did I. Instead, we told stories. One by one. Of the time John fell into a fish barrel and refused to come out unless given cinnamon bread. How Brynja once braided flowers into a goat's beard and declared him king. Of Elida teaching herself to read by candlelight, mouthing each syllable with a reverence only the young possess. The stories were not heavy. They floated like petals. On the river, time moved gently around us. The sky deepened from blue to soft lavender. Birds returned to the trees. The air cooled but did not chill. Thora lit a taper, not for ceremony, but for warmth. Its flame flickered between the stones, and for a moment cast shadows that danced, like children's hands. "I used to think remembering would trap me," she said, "but I think it frees me." I nodded. "So long as we speak them," I whispered. "They walk with us." Stars blinked overhead, one by one, tentative at first, then bold. We did not speak more, we did not sleep quickly. But eventually, with the fire low and the light returned to sky and stone alike, we closed our eyes beneath the tree, and for the first time since that morning on the coast I dreamed, but not of waves nor smoke. I dreamed of a river and the sound of laughter. Dawn did not arrive with fanfare. It unfolded, soft, slow, as if the sky itself were exhaling. Mist clung to the base of the willow trees in the vale, and the first birds stirred with tentative chirps, not yet songs, only the beginning of remembering. How? I woke to the sound of the river, low and steady, like a lullaby still playing long after sleep had passed. The fire had gone out in the night, leaving behind a faint scent of ash and a circle of warmth in the dew-covered grass where we had slept. Thora was already awake, kneeling by the water's edge. She cupped a palmful of river and splashed it gently on her cheeks. Then she sat back on her heels and looked up. Her face held no fear, only a quiet stillness. I joined her without a word. We sat side by side, feet brushing the edge of the stream, watching the water move with the patience of Old stories. The air around us carried no weight, no tension, just the hushed rustling of grass, the shifting of light, and the knowledge that we were still here. I dreamt of the sea, Thora said softly. Was it angry? No, she replied. It was calm, vast, empty, but not lonely. I think, she paused. I think it was waiting. For what? For us to stop grieving it. I watched her for a moment. Her eyes were on the horizon, where the first true light of morning pushed through low clouds, spreading across the valley floor, like a breath returned to a long-dead body. We rose slowly, packing our things with care. Not because we were rushed, but because it felt right to do things with purpose now. We folded our cloaks, tightened our boots, smoothed the grass where we had lain. Thora held the 3 stones in her hands for a while before placing them gently back into her satchel. She ran her thumb along the edge of each one. We don't have to bury them, she said. No, I agreed. They're not burdens anymore. We began walking, following the line of the river. The valley curved ahead of us, and beyond its rim, hills softened into forest. There were signs of people, barely visible tracks, the distant shape of a path too straight for chance. We could reach it by midday if we wanted, but we didn't speak of arrival. We spoke of return, not to what had been, but to what could now become. Along the riverbank, we found a place where driftwood had collected, bleached branches tangled together, like the bones of forgotten ships. Among them, a single feather lay tucked between 2 stones. Thora picked it up. She turned it slowly in her fingers, watching how the light danced across its edge. A sign? I asked. She smiled faintly. A message. From who? She looked at me and said, from us, to us, from the ones we lost perhaps, or maybe just from the sky. We climbed a small rise where the land opened wide, giving view of the west. And there it was, the path, winding through trees toward a distant smudge of smoke. Maybe a village, maybe just one house. A place where someone lived. A place where stories might be shared. Thora hesitated. Do we go? She asked. I nodded. We go, not to forget, but to continue, she said. We took one last look at the valley, the place where grief had quieted, where memory had been honoured, where light had gently and without demand returned. Then we stepped forward. The trail welcomed us, not with grandeur, but with subtle shifts, a break in the grass, a worn route, a path that seemed both ancient and new. As we walked, the sky opened fully, blue, brilliant, untouched by smoke. I thought of John and Elida and Brynja, of their voices, their hands, not as they had been in the end, but as they were in the stories we had told by the fire, and I knew they walked with us, not behind, not ahead, but beside, always. We reached a ridge by midday and sat beneath a tree whose branches twisted like calligraphy. The wind moved through its leaves with a voice like old pages turning. I took out my journal, and for the first time since the raids, I wrote, not to capture loss, but to hold light. To remember what it felt like to carry names not as burdens, but as blessings. Thora added her own words beside mine, fragments of thought, small poems, promises whispered to paper, and together, beneath the same sky that had watched over fire and sea and silence and song, we wrote a beginning.